I could have been twice as rich if I hadn't made one dumb mistake 50 years ago. That's not humility, that's arithmetic. The problem with life is you don't get to rerun the tape. You only get one shot. By the time you're 60, the margin for error is gone. You've already made most of your mistakes. The only question is, do you keep compounding them or do you finally wise up? Let me give you the first unpleasant truth. Past 60, your time is more valuable than your money. And yet, most people keep behaving as if they have endless tomorrows. They don't. I've buried enough friends to know if you're older than 60, you don't need a miracle. You need discipline, you need clarity, and above all, you need to stop doing stupid things. I don't mean rocket science stupid. I mean ordinary stupidity, the kind that ruins 90% of lives. Envy, debt, overconfidence, the wrong spouse, the wrong friends, the wrong habits. Most people past 60 are still looking for some magic trick to undo a lifetime of sloppy decisions. Here's a newsflash. The compounding you ignored in your 20 seconds and 30 seconds doesn't suddenly appear at 65. The only compounding left is the compounding of your daily behavior, your health, your temperament, your choices, and that compounding can still ruin you. Take my own family history. I watched the Great Depression wipe out everything. Banks closed, businesses collapsed. People who thought they were rich on Monday were broke by Friday. My father's clients, most of them never recovered. That stays with you. Once you've seen wealth vanish like smoke, you don't kid yourself about safety. You learn that survival beats brilliance. That lesson applies 10 times over if you're past 60. You can't rebuild from zero anymore. There's no starting over. A young fool can recover. An old fool stays a fool. So if you're over 60, here's the checklist. Stop chasing hot investments. You won't get rich quick, you'll get poor slowly. Stop hanging around losers. Their drama becomes your drama. Stop pretending you'll change tomorrow. If you don't fix the habit today, you never will. Stop envying people who got luckier than you. Envy doesn't make them poorer. It makes you miserable. It's not glamorous advice. It's not a 10x hack. But it's how I stayed alive, sane, and reasonably prosperous through 9 decades of chaos. Now, some people hear this and say, Charlie, you sound cynical. Wrong. I'm realistic. And realism, not optimism, is what keeps you alive at 60, 70, 80, and beyond. The truth is, you don't need brilliance at this age. You need avoidance. You need to stop doing dumb things. And the list of dumb things is very short, which is lucky, because by now your energy is limited. Think about it this way. By 60, you already know most of what you'll ever know. The question is whether you finally start acting like it. I didn't get rich by being smarter than everyone. I got rich by avoiding the traps most people insist on falling into. And if you're over 60, avoiding stupidity is the only game left to play. So let's start there. Envy is the only sin that isn't any fun. Think about it. Lust can be fun. Gluttony, at least you get a good meal. Even anger can give you a short thrill. But envy, you just sit there stewing while the other guy enjoys his yacht. You don't gain a thing. Yet most people past 60 can't stop comparing. They look at their neighbor's retirement house, their golf club membership, their children's careers, and think, why not me? It's pathetic. By 60, you should know better. If you don't, you're guaranteeing yourself a bitter old age. I've been rich and I've been poor. I grew up during the Depression with nothing. I ended up a billionaire. But let me tell you something. The happiest people I've known weren't the richest. They were the ones who stopped keeping score. There's always someone with a bigger balance sheet. Always someone who got luckier. Always some idiot who struck oil or bought Apple stock in 2003 and never sold. If that bothers you, you'll never have peace, no matter how well you did. Here's what envy really is: a lack of self-respect. You're saying, I'd rather measure my life by someone else's scoreboard than by my own values. That's weakness, pure and simple. And weakness in old age is fatal. I've watched successful people fall apart because they couldn't stand seeing their peers get richer. They already had enough. They were secure. But envy gnawed at them until they made some dumb move buying overpriced tech stocks, doubling down on bad real estate, chasing the next big thing. And when it collapsed, they weren't just poor, they were humiliated. Warren and I used to joke that avoiding envy is the easiest competitive advantage in the world. Most people are incapable of it. They'd rather self-destruct than let someone else get ahead. So here's the advice for anyone over 60. Cut envy out like a cancer. If your neighbor drives a Ferrari, congratulate him. Then get back in your old Buick and go home. The Ferrari won't make him wiser, healthier, or kinder. It won't make his marriage better. And in 20 years, it'll be a rusty collector's item. You know, what does compound at 60? Gratitude. Not the fake social media kind. Real gratitude. The kind that lets you wake up and say, I'm still here, my bills are paid, my family doesn't hate me. That's enough. I've outlived a lot of very rich people. And let me tell you, when you're in your 80 seconds and 90 seconds, the scoreboard shrinks. Nobody cares about your bank account. They care if you're decent company. If you're still curious. If you can still laugh at yourself. Envy poisons all of that. It makes you small, bitter, and impossible to be around. So here's the blunt truth. If you're over 60 and you're still consumed by envy, you're wasting what little time you have left, and you'll die miserable. Cut it out today. Because once you stop competing with everybody else, you finally have the freedom to enjoy your own damn life. I don't mind telling you, I've made plenty of dumb mistakes. The difference is, I survived them. Most people don't. One mistake in particular still irritates me, not because of the money, but because it was avoidable. I once passed on an investment that would have made me hundreds of millions. Why? Because I let ego get in the way. The details don't matter. The point is, I thought I was too smart to bother. I wanted something prettier, more sophisticated, more worthy of my brainpower. The plain, obvious deal didn't interest me, and by ignoring it, I paid the tuition for arrogance. You see, people think the biggest mistakes in investing come from ignorance. That's wrong. They come from knowing too much or thinking you do. Overconfidence destroys more wealth than stupidity ever did. At 60, 70, 80 years old, this is a critical lesson. By now, you've probably had some success. You survived your career, raised your family, built a nest egg, good. But the danger is you start thinking you can't be wrong, and that's when you make the catastrophic move. I've watched people near retirement pour their savings into garbage investments. Why? Because they thought they saw something others didn't. 9 times out of 10, what they saw was an illusion, and illusions are expensive. Here's the real trick to investing and to life. You don't need brilliance. You need humility. You need to admit daily that you're capable of screwing up, and then you structure your affairs so that when you inevitably screw up, you don't go broke. That's what saved me. My mistake cost me millions in upside, but it didn't sink me because I avoided leverage. I avoided overconcentration. I avoided being the idiot who bets everything on a single hand. Think back on the Great Depression. The people who got destroyed weren't the cautious plotters. It was the leveraged dreamers, the ones who borrowed like crazy because they thought the future was guaranteed. When reality showed up, they were wiped out overnight. At 60 plus, you can't afford that kind of mistake. You don't have 40 years left to rebuild. One reckless decision can undo a lifetime of careful compounding. So what's the practical takeaway? Don't get clever. The world doesn't reward clever past a certain age, it punishes it. Don't overreach. If you can't explain the investment in one sentence, you shouldn't own it. Don't think missing out is a tragedy. It's not. Going broke is the tragedy. I've missed hundreds of opportunities. The world is full of them. You don't need them all. You just need to avoid the big wipeouts. Here's the irony. The dumb mistake that cost me millions also saved me. It taught me that chasing brilliance is for fools, Avoiding stupidity is for survivors. And survival after 60 is the only game that matters. So don't worry about the millions you could have made. Worry about the millions you could still lose if you forget how fallible you are. That's the real lesson. The older I get, the more I notice. People don't actually think, they just rearrange their prejudices. By 60, most folks are convinced their opinions are facts. They've repeated them so often that doubt feels like weakness. And so they go through life smug and wrong, which is a terrible combination. I'll tell you the truth. Most of what you believe is probably false, or at least incomplete. If you can't admit that, you're in trouble. I spent my whole career learning how to kill my own best-loved ideas. Warren and I call it destroy your own wrong ideas early, before they destroy you. It's the single best mental habit I ever developed. And yet almost no one practices it. Instead, they cling to nonsense. In investing, I've seen people cling to the market always goes up right before a 50% crash. I've seen people cling to real estate never loses value right before it did. I've seen PhDs cling to elaborate theories that collapsed the first time reality intervened. Confidence without evidence is just ego, and ego is expensive. By 60, you should know how often you've been wrong. You've made dumb purchases, trusted the wrong people, backed the wrong horse, maybe even married the wrong person. And yet, somehow, you still think your current opinions are bulletproof. Why? The truth is, wisdom is the ability to say, I don't know. I've said it thousands of times. Sometimes I'd add, and I don't care. That's even better, because if you admit you don't know, you stop gambling on things you don't understand. The world is filled with people who think they're experts. At dinner tables, at investment clubs, on television, 99% of them are blowing smoke, and the other 1% is too busy actually working to show up on CNBC. So, how do you fix this overconfidence problem? Here's my checklist. Assume you're ignorant. That way you'll keep learning. Force yourself to read things you disagree with. Otherwise, you're just confirming your own stupidity. Look for disconfirming evidence. If you're bullish on something, search for reasons it might fail. And above all, avoid the disease of certainty. Certainty kills curiosity, and curiosity is the only thing that keeps you sharp past 60. I once told a group of students, if you can't state the other side's argument better than they can, you don't understand your own argument. They laughed. But it's true. If you can't argue against yourself, you're not thinking, you're cheerleading. And here's the punchline. Past 60, cheerleading is dangerous. Because if you bet your retirement savings on your favorite idea and it turns out you were wrong, you don't have time to recover. So the rational strategy is simple. So downgrade your confidence, upgrade your humility. It won't make you sound impressive at cocktail parties, but it will keep you solvent, sane, and alive. And in the long run, that's a much better outcome. Most people spend their whole lives as careerists. They follow orders, polish resumes, and hope someone higher up notices. That's fine if you like security, but it's a lousy way to build wealth or independence. I figured this out early. Working for a paycheck is like running on a treadmill. You sweat a lot, but you stay in the same place. Ownership is what gets you off the treadmill. Ownership of businesses, ownership of investments, ownership of your own damn decisions. Now here's the rub. Careerism feels safer, and for the first 20 or 30 years, maybe an island. But by the time you hit 60, you realize that all those safe decisions added up to dependence. Dependence on a company, on a pension, on a system that may or may not keep its promises. That's why you see so many bitter retirees. They spent decades being obedient soldiers, and then they discover the generals don't care about them. I was lucky. I had mentors who shoved ownership thinking into my skull. Ben Franklin said, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. I took that to mean stop being a wage slave and learn to think like an owner. That's what Buffett and I did at Berkshire. We didn't try to impress anyone with job titles. We just bought businesses we liked and held on. We thought like landlords, not tenants. And over decades, that mindset compounded into freedom. Contrast that with the average careerist who spends his life asking, how do I please the boss? By 60, that habit is hard to break. They still measure themselves by titles, status, and approval. Meanwhile, the owner types are measuring by cash flow, autonomy, and time. Which one do you think sleeps better at night? Here's the point. Past 60, it's too late to climb the corporate ladder. But it's not too late to start acting like an owner. You don't need to buy a conglomerate. You can own your home outright. You can own a portfolio of boring dividend-paying stocks. You can own your time by saying no more often. Ownership thinking is about mindset as much as money. The careerist asks, how do I look? The owner asks, what actually works? And believe me, the difference shows. Careerists waste their retirement trying to impress people they don't even like. Owners quietly enjoy the fruits of having been rational. I'll give you a blunt example. When Warren and I bought See's Candies, we didn't care about impressing Wall Street. We cared about owning a wonderful business that generated cash. 40 years later, that little candy company has pumped billions into Berkshire. Meanwhile, half the careerists who mocked us are forgotten. So here's my advice. If you're past 60, stop thinking like an employee, even if you still are one. Stop asking for permission. Stop looking upward for validation. Start asking, what do I actually own? What do I actually control? Because ownership, not careerism, is the only thing that gives you freedom in old age. And freedom is the only thing worth having once the clock starts running out. I was born in 1924. That means my childhood was one long tutorial in misery. The Great Depression wasn't some abstract case study. It was neighbors losing farms, fathers out of work, families cutting dinner into smaller pieces so everyone could pretend they weren't hungry. My father was a lawyer, smart, educated, respectable, and yet his clients disappeared overnight when the banks collapsed. You learn fast that intelligence is no defense when the system itself breaks. That experience burned one lesson into my brain. Survival matters more than brilliance. During the Depression, the people who got through weren't the hotshots. They were the cautious ones, the savers, the ones who avoided debt like it was poison. They didn't gamble. They didn't chase fads. They clung to what they had and lived to fight another day. Meanwhile, the clever ones, the highly leveraged, the big spenders, the optimists who thought prosperity was permanent, got destroyed. Some never recovered. I never forgot that. It shaped the way I handled money my entire life. While the world celebrated leverage and speculation, I quietly built safety into everything I did. Berkshire Hathaway isn't some miracle of genius. It's a monument to survival. Warren and I always asked, what happens if we're wrong? And we structured our lives so that if we were wrong, we'd still be standing. That's the Depression talking. Now, if you're over 60, you need to understand this deeply. You don't have time for big comebacks. One financial disaster could take you out of the game permanently. So don't be clever, be durable. Here's what the Depression taught me that still applies. Cash is oxygen. You may think you'll never need it until you do, and then it's too late. Debt is a noose. Once it tightens, you can't breathe. Avoid it at all costs. Optimism is dangerous. The world doesn't always bounce back on your schedule. Humility is survival. The people who admitted they didn't know the future made fewer dumb bets. Most people don't want to hear this. They want some happy pep talk. Things always get better. Well, tell that to the family that lost everything in 1931 and never saw it come back. Look, I'm not saying you should be paralyzed with fear. I'm saying you should respect reality. And reality has sharp teeth. If you prepare for the bite, you'll survive it. I'm 99 years old. I've seen World War II, recessions, inflation, bubbles, crashes, and pandemics. And you know what? The same rule applies. Avoid stupidity, build margin of safety, and keep living to fight another day. That's not brilliance. That's survival instinct. And survival is underrated, especially after 60. Because at that age, the game isn't about getting rich anymore. It's about staying rich and staying sane. The Depression taught me that, and I've been grateful ever since. If you want to stay sane past 60, you need 3 rules. First, avoid debt. Second, avoid drama. Third, avoid dumb people. That's it. Those 3 will save you more misery than any stock tip or self-help book. Let's start with debt. I watched the Depression teach America this lesson the hard way. Debt wiped out families who thought they were safe. When income dries up, debt doesn't politely wait, it strangles you. I carried that memory all my life. That's why I avoided personal debt like the plague. No margin loans, no credit card balances, no gambling with borrowed money. You can't go broke if you don't owe anyone. That's obvious, but most people can't resist the temptation. At 60, the temptation should be dead. If you're still borrowing recklessly at that age, you're not unlucky, you're stupid. And stupidity in old age is fatal. Now, drama. Most of life's misery comes from entangling yourself with people who thrive on conflict. Spouses, relatives, business partners. If they create chaos, they'll drain you faster than any tax. I've always kept my life boring on purpose. Boring is underrated. No screaming matches, no lawsuits, no toxic partnerships, just steady, quiet compounding. It doesn't make headlines, but it makes for a peaceful life. And finally, dumb people. You can't imagine how destructive they are until you've spent time cleaning up their mess. I don't mean uneducated. I mean the kind of people who refuse to learn, who think they know everything, who repeat the same mistakes until everyone around them suffers. I cut them out early. No business with fools. No socializing with troublemakers. Warren and I built Berkshire partly by just saying no to idiots. That one discipline probably saved us billions. And it applies beyond money. At 60, your circle should be shrinking, not expanding. If someone adds stress without adding value, you don't need them. Here's the blunt truth. You don't get extra points for rescuing idiots. The world is full of them, and they'll happily drag you down with them. Let them sink alone. People ask me, Charlie, what's the secret to your longevity? They expect some diet tip or exercise routine. My answer is simpler. I avoided debt, drama, and dumb people. That reduces 90% of life's stress. And stress kills faster than old age. So if you're older than 60, here's your homework. Clean house, pay off the last of your debts, cut ties with toxic people, stop feeding chaos. You'll be amazed how light you feel. And for once, you might actually enjoy the years you've got left. Most partnerships fail. They collapse under ego, greed, or plain stupidity. Mine with Warren Buffett lasted nearly 60 years. That wasn't luck, that was design. What worked? First, we had complementary brains. Warren loved digging into the numbers. He could read 500 pages of financial statements like a kid reading comic books. I preferred the broader picture mental models, psychology, the architecture of decisions. Put those together, and we avoided a lot of mistakes. Second, we trusted each other completely. No contracts, no legal teams breathing down our necks. Just a handshake. If Warren said he'd do something, I knew it was done. He knew the same about me. In business, that level of trust is rarer than diamonds. Third, we shared values. Neither of us wanted a yacht or a private island or a life filled with sycophants. We wanted independence and rationality. That alignment saved us from endless fights about priorities. Now, what didn't work? Well, we missed things. We didn't buy Walmart early. We underestimated tech for decades. We stuck with mistakes longer than we should have. Being partners didn't make us infallible. It just made us less stupid. And sometimes we argued, but our arguments weren't about ego, they were about ideas. Warren and I could fight for an hour over an investment and then go to lunch laughing. Because neither of us cared about winning. We cared about being right. That's another secret. We killed bad ideas quickly. If Warren showed me something and I thought it stank, I said so. No sugarcoating. He did the same to me. Most people can't handle bluntness. We thrived on it. People imagine partnerships as grand dramatic alliances. Ours was boring. We read, we talked, we invested. Year after year, that boring process compounded into something extraordinary. Would I have been successful without Warren? Probably. Would he have been successful without me? Absolutely. But together, we avoided more stupidity than either of us could have managed alone. That's why Berkshire turned into a machine. And here's the real lesson. If you're past 60, stop chasing perfect partners. Stop looking for some savior. If you don't already have someone you trust deeply, you probably won't find them now. Instead, cultivate independence. Build systems that don't require perfect partners. If you are lucky enough to have a partner like I had with Warren, protect it. Don't nitpick, don't compete, don't turn it into a power struggle. Respect the differences and let rationality do the work. Because in the end, our partnership wasn't about money. It was about having someone to think with. And thinking, well, together is the rarest advantage in life. That worked. The rest, the missed deals, the errors didn't matter because the system we built survived them all. Everyone wants to know the secret to getting rich. They expect some magic formula, some hidden strategy. I'll save you the suspense. It's not magic. It's discipline. The surprising truth is, getting rich is mostly about not screwing up. I didn't become wealthy because I was the smartest man alive. I became wealthy because I avoided the disasters other people walk straight into. No drugs, no gambling, no wild leverage, no chasing hot tips, no divorces that cut my fortune in half. Just boring, consistent avoidance of stupidity. That's the secret nobody wants to hear. It's not sexy, it's not fast, but it works. People think they need brilliance. They don't. They need patience. They need the ability to sit still while everyone else chases nonsense. Warren and I got rich by buying good businesses and doing nothing for decades. That's about as exciting as watching paint dry. But look what it produced. Here's the paradox. Most people can't handle boredom. They'd rather do something dumb than sit quietly while compounding does the work. That's why casinos stay in business. That's why day trading apps have millions of users. And that's why most people will never be rich. Getting rich also requires brutal honesty with yourself. You need to admit when you're ignorant. You need to stay within your circle of competence. If you can't explain how a business makes money in one sentence, you have no business owning it. You also need to understand luck. I've been lucky, Warren's been lucky. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. But here's the catch. Luck only works if you're prepared. If you're drowning in debt, or distracted by envy, or chasing every fad, luck will pass you by. At 60 and beyond, this lesson matters more than ever. You don't have decades left to let compounding bail you out from mistakes. You need to double down on discipline. No wild bets. No envy-driven decisions. Just steady, rational management of what you already have. The truth is, most people don't get rich because they can't stand being ordinary. They want excitement, they want to look clever, they want applause, and the need for applause is poison in investing. You want the real secret? Be boring, be rational, be dull enough to let compounding work quietly in the background. If you can do that, you'll wake up one day and realize you're rich. Not because of brilliance, but because you survived long enough to let arithmetic do its job. That's the surprising truth. I've spent nearly a century watching people chase wealth. Some made it, most didn't. And the dividing line wasn't intelligence, it wasn't education, it wasn't luck, it was discipline. If you spend less than you earn, you'll be fine. If you spend more than you earn, nobody can help you. That's the first rule of compounding, and it's the last. You'd be amazed how many people refuse to follow it. Doctors, lawyers, executives, high income, fancy houses, expensive cars, and yet they're broke. Why? Because they treated money like a bottomless well, and when the well ran dry, they had nothing. Meanwhile, the quiet plumber who saved diligently, avoided debt, and invested in boring index funds ends up wealthy. Not flashy wealthy, but secure, independent, and free. It's not complicated. It's arithmetic. But human beings hate arithmetic when it tells them to stop spending. They'd rather lie to themselves. They think the next promotion, the next bull market, the next lottery ticket will save them. It won't. By 60, you should know this. If you don't, you'll learn the hard way. And the hard way at 60 usually means no recovery. Here's my advice for anyone in that stage of life. Simplify. Get rid of the unnecessary expenses. Cut the financial dead weight. Own less, owe less, need less. Freedom isn't about adding things. It's about subtracting stupidity. You don't need the latest car. You don't need a vacation home you barely use. You don't need to impress your neighbors. What you need is peace of mind. And peace of mind only comes from living beneath your means. I didn't plan to become a billionaire. That wasn't the goal. I just overshot by consistently avoiding mistakes. I saved, I invested, I let compounding work, and I kept my wants modest. That's the formula. It's not glamorous, but it works every time. So let me end with this. If you're not spending less than you earn, I can't help you. Warren can't help you. Nobody can. And if you're spending less than you earn, congratulations, you've already solved the hardest problem in finance. The rest is just details.